you know, the UK doctrine for resilience management. Sorry, Andrew, I didn't get that. Was somebody querying being able to hear me?
No, I've muted it, David.
It's muted.
Okay, yep, brilliant. So yeah, you know, the UK structure, the UK process, I think is of more immediate importance to us. We held the first workshop, which was very much a discussion about what it was that the NCSR, the consortium members, thought a community emergency hub would be from their point of view, what they needed it to be, what they would like it to be able to do to help them to start to be able to strengthen community and societal resilience. And we agreed with a number of kind of consensus points, I guess, at that first meeting that's led us on today to then hearing from our colleagues from Wiltshire, Red Cross, and indeed Lancashire. So just to remind you of those very, very basic outcomes from the previous meeting, we all agreed that the hubs could take a variety of forms. They could be flexible, they could be scalable to the event that you're trying to deal with. They could either be done virtually, and again, I think Lancashire are going to share some experiences about what that might look like. But there can also be anything from a temporary structure. We always use the example of a gazebo, or indeed a permanent. I'm sorry, Andrew, I'm getting a little bit of echoey feedback. Are you having the same problem?
Hi, David. Yeah, it's just, some people are coming in and haven't muted, so we will mute as we go along.
Forgive me. I'm not, in that case, I'm going to cut this very, very short. We also agreed that we should just build on existing initiatives. Also, we do a lot of stuff around rest centres, humanitarian assistance centres. You know, is there an opportunity here to just repurpose some of those existing arrangements for community emergency hub usage? One of the key principles, of course, is that they should be owned and run by local communities. You know, this is a way of trying to allow communities to solve their own problems using what's available to them. But critically for me, having the process to be able to escalate issues that are beyond their own capability or capacity locally into the official response and recovery. And also that there are obviously some reciprocal challenges to overcome. And I'm really interested to hear from our three speakers about some of the critical success factors, some of the learning along the process of them introducing their own versions of community hubs. So just to remind you, that was the kind of consensus discussion we'd had. If you just be kind enough to give me the next slide, Andrew, we also agreed that we would then share with you some more of the more local practice here in the UK and some of the lessons that our colleagues have learned. And at the end of it, we'll come back to a conversation with you about exactly what we'll do with this knowledge, this learning, with a very much a kind of an intention to produce for NCSR colleagues a generic, flexible, scalable piece of guidance, or a module, to use the terminology that we're beginning to use. And again, we intend to do that either by the end of this calendar year or very early in 2024. So without any further ado, Andrew, if you'd like to introduce the first of our speakers, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, David. So just to remind people in terms of today's agenda, so our first speaker will be Chris from Wiltshire and Swindon LRF. So Chris, I'll stop sharing, and if you're able to then bring your slides up, then that would be fantastic. Yes, I can see those now, Chris, so go ahead.
Perfect. It was showing my email to me. I was like, oh, don't do that. Please don't do that. But hopefully it's now showing the right thing. Yeah, so my name is Chris, and I am the Wiltshire and Swindon Local Resilience Forum Community Resilience Officer. But before that, I've been in local authority emergency planning for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years now across a couple of different councils. So you'll probably see where some of that comes into place in this initiative. Those who don't know, Wiltshire and Swindon is predominantly a rural county, but we do have some bigger towns and a city that was quite well known for Novichok a few years ago. So we're a bit of a mixture, but we've got quite a bit of rural as part of how we are. I also want to say I apologise to some of you that might have seen this beforehand. I recognise some of the names on here from ones I've done this to before, but hopefully it's still interesting and useful. So hopefully this now changes slide to the next one. Hopefully that's now changed. So most importantly, why are we trying to do this and what are the problems we tried to solve? So we've always had quite a big gap between our responding agencies and our communities. We like to think that we're really joined up, but actually we probably aren't. And a good example of that is when we do debriefs about an incident somewhere, we think we've done a really good job, and actually we haven't debriefed the community themselves and actually asked the ones that we affected how well we did. So I guess it's kind of a good example of where the gap sort of is quite evident. The LRF has decided to focus much more on whole society resilience approach to things. So again, looking at how we do things much better with the community. We wanted to have a look at something we could do where there isn't community emergency groups established. So I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a minute.
Hi, Chris. You're just on mute momentarily.
It did just say someone's muted me. It must be that bad that someone had to mute me instead. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear.
Perfect. So many of our communities have wanted to do things previously, and I think COVID showed all of us how much there is that will to sort of help with things. We've had the same sort of thing with snow and flooding in the past. So again, how are we trying to keep that going? And again, we get quite a wide variety of incidents. So being rural, we get the usual power cuts, the floods, the snow, but having quite a few big urban areas, we get the sort of stuff that sort of affects them as well. It's in a different sort of capacity. So again, we wanted to look at how we could kind of create something that sort of worked for everybody. So next one, hopefully. So we come up with something called emergency contact hubs. So I'll be honest, you probably will have the same problem that we do. Coming up with a name for these things is half the problem. So everybody has a kind of community hub or an emergency hub, an evacuation hub, a warm centre, a cold centre, you name it. Those names have been taken. So this was probably the hardest part of the journey, was kind of getting everyone to agree on an initial name. Part of our name is also about national power outage work that we've been doing. So again, this kind of fitted into our project and our timeline with that. And hopefully as we go through, you'll kind of see where it links in quite well. And then what our idea is to kind of cover as many of the county with these as possible. We did steal our idea from New Zealand. So hopefully you've all seen how good that one was. So we've kind of borrowed that and adapted it to what we think works well for where we are. So what we're trying to achieve is looking at things as a community. So we're not trying to get individual households to, come together as a community if it's only them being affected. So we sort of tell everybody to check their own household first, then check on their neighbours, and then check on their street. Just like you do when your power goes out. Is it just me? Is it my neighbours? Is it my street? It's kind of the way we sort of try and describe them to everybody. And if it gets kind of past that, where we believe the hub concept kind of comes into action. So most people are quite happy to look outside their front door and see if it's just them or not. And then much past that idea, we kind of think is where the hub sort of works. But as they sort of mentioned at the very beginning of this session, we also believe that we have larger scale incidents quite often here, whereby more than one hub will be activated, and then we have to work out how that links into the wider sort of ether of emergency response. So again, our system is hopefully designed to fit in everything really. But this is kind of the step-by-step process we do with resilience on how these hubs might be activated. So most importantly, being a rural county, we don't necessarily have community buildings across the whole county. They are a massive variety in style, type, and what they are. Lots of places have a pub, like the idyllic one looking in the corner, but lots of places sort of don't have the right kind of buildings that we would initially look for. So we let them have any building that they think works for them in their community. So it might be a religious venue, a church, a community centre, a library, a sports club, or a pub. As long as it's got a roof and a toilet, we're not particularly worried about it. The added thing to that is effectively they don't need to be resilient buildings. So we're not expecting to have a power generation resource or anything like that. They just need to be somewhere that community would, I guess, gravitate towards in an emergency, somewhere they kind of know and identify. I don't really want a room at the back of a building no one's ever seen or heard of before. And equally, we kind of try to steer them away from ones that have like passes like this to get in. I want a key or a code, not a scanny pass that only some people have. So again, we try to use sort of, I guess, just generic community buildings. So we have a wide variety of those that tend to be looked upon. We did have a lot of questions about using our rest centres as these hubs beforehand, but a lot of our rest centres are sort of like, again, the scanny pass ones to get in, so they're not particularly ideal for community venues because you have to have someone with the pass to get in the first place. So this sort of variety is what we tend to look for. So one of the most important things is, being a rural-ish county, we do have quite a few areas that have the, I guess, emergency groups is what we've defined them as. And it would be ideal if everywhere had these, but it's unrealistic to expect that to happen. So this is defined to work with an area with a community group, but with also an area that doesn't have them. So more of our sort of built up areas and towns and cities, and equally the sort of like the new housing estates don't have these groups. So it was really important for us to make this work on a basis that actually you don't need one of these groups in the first place to do it, you just need people. So again, that was one of the key things that we realised very quickly that was important to make it work on that sort of demographic of, I guess, design. Again, risks that it covers. So we've had quite a few flooding incidents over the years. We struggle with snow, in particularly in the rural areas whereby we can't get to half of the places when it snows. We do have lots of tractors that farmers use to move the snow around, but again, quite a few of these places have long, sort of windy roads that we're just never going to be able to get to in a quick time. Storm Eunice a few years ago cut off quite a few of our communities for a considerable amount of time. So again, it needs us to work for that. We don't have very many high-rise towers for fires, but we do tend to have quite a lot of thatched cottages. And then when one of those catches fire, the next three do as well. So trying to look at things that work for that one. And then displaced people. So we had a train derailment a couple of years ago and had to deal with all the passengers off the train. So again, how do we deal with people like that who perhaps don't know the area? So the idea was basically to cover everything we could possibly think of risk-wise. The only thing we sort of steer away from is terrorism for a few different reasons. And we, again, trying to mention that to communities tends to make them all start being quite sort of worried and scared. So we tend to try and focus on these particular ones as good examples. So most importantly, how does it work? So any of you that have seen the New Zealand model, this is very similar to that. So again, we believe in that communities want a bit of structure to follow, but not to be told what to do. We've tried that before. They don't tend to like it, and they tend to do something else completely different. And equally, to tell them what to do, you kind of need to have an already established community group to do that too. So we sort of try to steer away from that a little bit. But often a lot of them want to do something and want a little bit of guidance of where to go. So our system works on different roles for people to take up. So as you can see with the blob people, there are different coloured lanyards that are different roles people can take up. So there always needs to be someone that kind of leads. So you've got like a supervisor. An information officer is one of them. So again, information is the most important thing in a community and an incident. So someone has to look after the incoming information and the outgoing information. So what's going on in the area? What's the latest information? What can you tell the community about it? What are we doing to help? Receptionist, everyone loves one of those, especially when you're a doctor, surgeon, or a dentist. But effectively, the person they first see when they come into the area is the receptionist, so someone kind of checks them in. Public information, so that's again making sure that we have like a situation board outside of most of them. So the war went off at 2 o'clock. It's okay to drink even though it's a bit brown. It's probably going to come back on in 4 hours. There's some bottled water getting delivered in 2 hours. So that sort of thing, keeping that up to date so people can kind of come and have a look and see what's going on. Welfare, what it says on the tin really. So looking after people, making them cups of tea, coffee, making sure they're okay. Needs and offers. So this was something I'd never heard of before until I looked at the New Zealand model. So lots of people come in and say, I need help with putting some sandbags outside my house, moving some debris, getting me some shopping, getting my medication, which is again quite normal. But lots of people also come in and say, I'm available to help and I'm happy to do A, B, C, and D. So this person basically matches those things together to try and make a more coordinated approach. And then facilities is what it says on the tin. So making sure the building's locked, unlocked, the toilets have got toilet roll in them, the water's fine, that kind of stuff. Importantly, you don't have to do all of these roles. You do what works for you as a community, and equally you can double up on roles to kind of make things work depending on who's available. So that's kind of what it looks like. These are what our lanyards look like. So again, they're in the hubs. They pick them up. It tells you roughly what to do on one side and gives you a nice color on the other side. So there's nothing particularly difficult about them. They're not complicated. They just are what they are. The whole point is this is community owned and run. So for a local authority staff, we don't have to staff these at all. We're not expected to tell them what to do, how to run it, give any orders or anything else. They are completely community run. What they decide to do is completely their decision. These are just kind of prompts to prompt them in the right direction, to give them a little bit of structure. And that's how we're trying to sell it to them all, is basically we're not telling them what to do because you don't like that. So we're letting you do something in a structure that kind of hopefully works for you to adapt. They do have a pack that comes with this, which I think I'll cover in a minute, which basically is a bit more detail. So these are the roles. This is how we suggest you set it up. These are some of the ways that we're going to interact with you and things like that. So they do get a little bit of guidance, but it's done on we've all been there before. We write a plan that's 45 pages long that nobody reads. So the way we're trying to do this is to think most of these people are not really involved necessarily in community resilience or anything else beforehand. They've just kind of turned up to the hub and they want to take on some of these roles. So it needs to be very simple and quick for them to sort of work out. And we tested this, I think, 4 times in different places and kind of improved as we went through to kind of make sure that structure sort of worked. So most importantly, linking responders. So I said at the start, there's a massive gap between communities and responders. So we, again, sometimes I've made the mistake on our LRF of training just the tactical staff, and sometimes that doesn't get through to the operational staff on the ground. So we've realised when you produce schemes like this, you actually have to train the PCSOs, the local fire staff, the local police officers, the local authority staff that actually go out on the ground. So we are doing that with this scheme so they understand how it works. It's written into a lot of our plans and process in other areas of work. Healthcare staff are working out how they will, in certain instances, come to these hubs to actually help with different bits and pieces, like give advice, administer first aid, and that sort of thing. And again, utilities companies who deliver bottled water, go and do food drops for things in emergencies, are hopefully going to use these sites to be a little bit more linked up. So the aim is that these are kind of become the one-stop shop for incidents for us to link in with the community. We all love to use social media. It's really quick and really easy for us to sort of say things. However, half of our population don't really have the right social media that we use, or just aren't on it at all. So we've got to try and have, I guess, a thing that kind of works for those other people that don't use that. So that's how we will link in. I'm not going to go into it, but in a national power outage, these hubs are our community sort of points of call. And the way it will work for our sort of things like that is PCSOs will go down to these hubs, tell them information and pick up information, then report back up to our next level to make sure it all links up nicely. But we're using these sorts of hubs for quite a number of things like that to try and link up stuff that's sort of not quite really working at the minute properly. Like I said earlier, there are loads of other hubs that we have. Communities in their community plans will call a version of this hub anything you can possibly imagine, place of safety and stuff like that. So the idea being is we are utilizing many of the other hub points that we already have and putting them as these. We're trying to encourage communities to adopt this and basically delete their previous place of safety, evacuation hub, or whatever, and basically become one of these instead. So it becomes a much more generic thing that we can kind of use. And we're again talking to utilities to make sure they can put their water distribution sites and things where these hubs are. So again, people sort of know in time, this is where you go for bits and pieces. So that's something we had to look at as we move through. Massively important thing, communications. So we can make a really good scheme and no one knows anything about it. And we've all been there where when I speak to a lot of community, they tell me it's just another scheme that you're rolling out that will change in 2 weeks' time. You'll spend a bit of time promoting it and then you'll move on to the next thing. So we feedback and said we need to look at this differently. So in order for this to work, people have to know what it is and where their local one is. So we spoke to a lot of different communities, understood that sticking something on the council and fire website and sending it out via a social media post isn't really going to cut the mustard. So we are now working with different parish councils and town councils and city councils to discuss what's the best method to promote these where you are. So is that via the news booklets they get through the post? Is that on notice boards in the village? But is that also in the Facebook groups that they have and other bits and pieces? So looking at the mums groups, the different bits of things that kind of work for their community. So again, living in a housing estate, potentially a new housing estate, you're probably not going to know some of the traditional methods that work for your area. So how do we engage with those? So we've tried lots of different things in different areas to try and make it a bit more well known. We, I guess, fortunately got picked up by various different news and radio stations as we were sort of first doing this project, where they came to some parish council meetings and then they took it everywhere else, which was great. But however, they got a lot of it wrong because it wasn't via a press release that we wrote. So promotion and communication is great, but it's trying to make sure everybody understands it in the first place in the way you want them to. I often find when you do a press release, they're less interested in that. They're more interested in the things they've kind of found themselves. So that has all been, I guess, a learning point for us, is kind of making sure that we have everything to the point at the very beginning so they understand it. In terms of packs, so every hub gets a pack. So they get a guide, they get a map of their area. They all love maps of their area, so they can put dots on them, draw lines on them. This is where it's flooding, this is where the power outage is, those kind of things. They all get lanyards and roll cards. They get FAQs. So again, there are certain things that questions they always ask. So weirdly, the one that always comes up in exercises is, how long can I have my chicken out of the fridge when I can still eat it, and stuff like that. So we've done lots of like generic FAQs on bits and pieces that they'll get the answers to. Lots of baby milk formula things come up as well. So again, those sorts of things. They get a logbook. So again, we have created like some of those rip-off logbooks of two copies that they can have. They get stickers for the window and they get posters. So they don't get loads of stuff, but this means that we can kind of have a pack that lots of them can have, and we can produce lots of them. The most important slide is cost. So how much is this going to cost you or cost us? The answer is very little. So we got lanyards that from our sort of FM facilities management system in the council. So we had to pay for those, but we used the contracts that already existed. So that makes them much cheaper. We also had to buy window stickers. So again, they were about £300, I think, to buy about 400. So they're not massively expensive. And we had to print off the logbooks, the posters, the maps. So again, most LRFs are fortunate enough that one of the organisations has a print room. So again, we utilised that in one of our organisations to do these bits and pieces. So on the whole, it didn't cost us very much. So that for us is probably one of the most important things, is there's no point in doing schemes that cost us a lot of money that 2 years down the line there's no funding for. So that's kind of where we got it from. So I guess the most important thing for us is it's a pretty cheap way of doing things. Promotion in general doesn't cost too much if you use the right avenues. And branding wise, our internal branding team made all of the leaflets and things for us, but they're all non-LRF specific. So anybody else can kind of take them and adapt them if they wanted to, was kind of the idea with them. And I think that's pretty much my whistle-stop tour of it. So some of you might have seen it before. Hopefully it's not bored you the second time round.
That's fantastic, Chris. Thank you very much. And just to echo one of the comments in terms of the great graphics that you've been able to use to illustrate your presentation. As I prompt Hannah to share her slides, just to mention to Chris that obviously there are lots of questions coming in on the the chat function already. So to save time, if you're able, there are a number that I'm sure you'll be able to respond to as Hannah is speaking, and so that would be absolutely fantastic. And obviously that will keep the chat function ticking over so that we don't have all of those questions coming in at the end. I think there's a good 5 or 6 questions there already, and I anticipate obviously Hannah will also then generate new questions. So without further ado, I'll just pass over to Hannah now for your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Just to check, you can see the slides now. I'm sharing the screen.
I can, yes.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, so thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to speak today about our project. So I'm Hannah Sutton. I'm the business manager at Lancashire Resilience Forum. I'm relatively new in that post, and that post has actually come about due to the funding, the capacity and capability funding that we've recently received from DLUC, so the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. With regards to this particular project, I'm acting as like the project sponsor, so sort of overseeing the wider project and supporting our project lead as he progresses it in more detail. So what's it all about then? So there's a bit of background and context. Our project is all about looking at how we take that whole society approach to resilience and enhance our formal existing response protocols by adding that power of the local community. So for us, it's actually quite different to the community hub that you've just heard Chris speak about. We're actually looking more at providing community groups with access to resilient telecommunications equipment in order to be able to access our Lancashire Emergency Radio Area Link, or the ERL for short, network, for them to be able to support our joined up multi-agency response. So the question we were really asking at the start of this project was, where do our community groups fit in to this formal response structure that we have within our Resilience Forum? So I'm aware that obviously some colleagues might not be familiar with some of the terminology or the acronyms on there, but we've got TCCs, or the Tactical Coordination Centres, and the Tactical Coordination Groups, or the Strategic Coordination Groups. So how can our community groups fit into this overarching picture? And really, the overwhelming response we got from the project team was through our local authority partners and via their own agency control centres. So the fact that we needed to get the buy-in from our local authority partners was absolutely critical to the success of instigating this project. And luckily for us, it was our local authority partners that said to us that, well, obviously it will be through us. We have our connections with our community groups, and we would be that conduit into the formal structure. So this isn't about allowing the community groups that direct access into our tactical coordinating group conversations or the strategic coordinating group conversations, but still being able to relay information up through the local authorities as that conduit to then put into that overarching shared situational awareness and developing that common operating picture. Now, as I said, this is slightly different to what Chris has just been speaking about from Wiltshire's Community Hub perspective. So for our project, we're not currently focusing on that one-stop shop, that place within the community that the public go to for information. For us, that will be picked up perhaps later down the line, but that's something that our humanitarian assistance subgroup will be looking into. And in Lancashire, our humanitarian assistance plans are currently undergoing a significant review, so that will develop in time. But for now, our focus is more on providing the means of contact between the community and the Lancashire Resilience Forum, so via a secure and reliable, resilient network, and through those local authority partners as the conduit, to enable that information sharing and also that escalation of any unmet needs within our communities during a response. We do imagine in time that such community groups with this equipment will probably mobilise to those humanitarian assistance hubs, or the hubs similar to what Chris has just been speaking about. But currently that's slightly out of scope for our project, just because of where we are in our position in Lancashire on our developments in those areas. So the reason why the equipment that we'll be providing is all going to be based around our Lancashire Emergency Radio Area Link, or ERL, is because we do have this actually stated in our Resilient Telecommunications Plan, that this would be our preferred interoperability channel particularly during those times of crisis and where there's been disruption to communications. So we have identified Errol as that preferred interoperability channel, and actually we were able to test this relatively recently during the national power outage exercise Mighty Oak. During that exercise and the evolution of how Mighty Oak came about, it did become increasingly clear that all of the main methods of communication would either be completely or partially compromised, and that included airwave. And then the only system that would be left unaffected in most of the UK, it seemed, would be the satellite phones. But in Lancashire, under those conditions, we found that we still also had access to our Errol network, and that enabled agencies that were based within the footprint of the network to still be able to pass that critical information during that simulated national power outage. So we are in the early stages of our projects, I have to say, but the benefits that we would expect are sort of across the community groups and their networks, but also for the emergency responders and government. So some of those highlighted benefits for the community groups and their networks, obviously you can see on the screen, and I won't read them out, but knowing that the community groups are able to feed into the formal emergency response structures and share that information and escalate risks or any issues will definitely provide much greater confidence of that collective and coordinated response. It's coming back to that whole of society approach to resilience, which is obviously the real buzzwords at the moment, and singing to the hymn sheet of the UK government resilience framework. And then being able to share key messages into our tactical coordination groups and our strategic coordination groups, filtering information back down to the community groups via our local authorities, will strengthen those relationships and support that key objective of communicating risk to the public. Similarly, those benefits for government emergency responders, so it's that improved understanding of our communities and their needs, so including perhaps a better awareness of the vulnerable. And I'm sure we're all aware that vulnerability can take different forms and look completely different from response to response. But by having sort of those extra eyes and ears on the ground, being able to report into the formal structures via those resilient telecommunications equipment, we might get a better idea of what vulnerable means in this particular incident, and therefore be able to meet any unmet needs through that structure. It will also enhance the interoperability among communities and the emergency responders, especially as we mentioned in the event of the power failure or loss of communications. So Errol in particular does provide us great resilience in that respect. So lots of these benefits, as you'll see, do align with some of those national resilience standards and also with the ambitions in the UK Government Resilience Framework. And in that framework, it has set out that community resilience in England is enabled when the public are supported to harness local resources and expertise to help themselves and their communities. So yet again, coming back to that whole society approach to resilience, we absolutely agree that more often than not, communities can and do help themselves, especially with the support of those active community groups in their localities. However, where there are perhaps more vulnerable communities or where there are any additional needs that require support from emergency responders, the resilient telecommunications equipment that we will provide through this project will facilitate that much better interoperability and ensure that requirements that can't be met by the communities themselves are escalated and addressed by the wider response. So when we first put this bid together, we asked ourselves, what is it? What goes into a community-based communication hub? And these were sort of our initial thoughts. And as you can see, this is where we're kind of in that conundrum where there is definitely that potential overlap with that humanitarian assistance hub and that one-stop shop where the public will go to. And it's clear to us that there's definitely not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. We've just heard Chris talk about the wide variety of buildings that you could mobilise for this sort of thing. So we appreciate that will be bespoke approaches depending on the communities. But for us, and for this particular project, the main element of focus is around that access to resilient communications in crisis. And also, obviously, making sure that we've got that collaboration piece involved, because it's vital that the community groups are involved in shaping a lot of this themselves. We know that people don't things being done to them, but we will do it together in collaboration. So we've established that the types of community groups that we're wanting to work with in this project are those that are well established and active in our local communities. By being as such, they are trusted by the people that they support. The groups would have community emergency plans in place and have an understanding of sort of emergency planning and response, and good links with their local authorities because of that. But also, quite critically, and to ensure the longevity of this, they must be willing to take on the ownership of any equipment that's provided. So essentially, we've got a certain pot that we were granted with the Innovation Fund for this project, and once that's gone, it's gone. So any ongoing cost for any ongoing maintenance of that equipment will need to be taken up by the community groups themselves, and that's what we've stipulated when we're communicating with them about this project to onboard them into the pilot. We are obviously as well looking to get that good spread across the county. In Lancashire, we are a mix of rural and urban, and we obviously want to make sure that we're covering a variety of our risks and hazards as well. So just to give an idea of sort of our indicative project timeline, so I have mentioned that we are pretty much in the early days of this project. We're by no means at a point where we've got anything to demonstrate or anything that's been tested, but we're sort of across phases 1 to 3 at the moment. But some of the milestones that we have achieved to date include that really significant buy-in from our local authority partners for their role as the conduit between the community groups and the formal emergency responder response. We have developed an agreed standard package of equipment. So as I've mentioned, there's a certain budget and we need to make sure that there's enough to go around to our community groups. So we've identified the standard equipment package that includes items such as handheld radios, base stations, antennas, alternative power sources. And what will happen is that when we onboard a community group for this project, our telecommunications experts will go out, conduct an assessment to understand their capabilities and determine what equipment they would need, which would ideally come from this standard package. But again, we can make adaptations as is appropriate and as is within the budget. We have also developed and circulated a expression of interest form. So we've pushed this out through the partnership, particularly through our local authority partners. We've also pushed it through our LRF website and our communications channels to really encourage community groups to engage in this project. And to date, we've been able to onboard 3 community groups to start to pilot the project, and we're currently in the initial assessment phases with those groups. The ongoing work and I suppose some of the next steps as well include that continued outreach to elicit more expressions of interest to come through from those community groups. And we are going to make much better use of our LRF communications officer to help us do more targeted communications, push things more through our website and our social media channels, and also through our community resilience subgroup, which is just now getting back up off the ground. We have been a little bit delayed with our community resilience subgroup coming back into its own post-COVID, but now we've got the personnel back on board, we can really drive things through that group as well. And we also have an LRF newsletter that we push information out as well. So we're really wanting to elicit more interest in this project and get more community groups coming forward. But we are also quite confident in the fact that as we start moving with the 3 that we've already onboarded, groups will start to see what this is all about and see it more in practice and then come on board in due course. We are also looking next to really look at that engagement piece again with the local authorities and the community groups to really develop and bottom out the protocols for the use of this equipment. So this isn't just equipment that we're providing just to be used as they see fit and, oh, it's nice to have a radio, let's call everybody. No, it comes back to the aims and objectives of our project, which is to facilitate that wider emergency response. So we need to really bottom out what the trigger levels are. We need to understand more about the community groups' plans themselves and how they fit into the local authority and the LRF plans, and understand how we're properly going to put this process in place as to when you would mobilise and use this equipment. And then with that, so the provision of equipment comes the provision of training, and action cards will be distributed with the equipment so that it's really clear and easy, just step-by-step instructions in the kit that you're given. And then a wider training package to be developed and delivered when the community groups are given their equipment as well. And then longer term, again, coming back to sort of the sustainability element of this, we're looking at the opportunities of linking in with our other subgroups and linking in with other opportunities across the forum to bring those community groups into our local resilience forum exercises, to properly test the equipment within specific scenarios, and to keep having those frequent touch base points with them so that we can, one, make sure that the equipment is still up to date and still working and functioning well, and that we know how we're using it together in the response. So I suppose some key learning, and just coming back to what David was mentioning in his introductions, some real key learning that we've had so far, and we're still in the early days of the project, is that we really needed that buy-in from our local authority partners, because we do need them to be the conduit in this particular project. The other learning is that there's so much talk of hubs, and again, Chris alluded to this in his presentation, that there's so many different varieties of hubs all over the place, which hub is which and what's doing what. And that's, again, why this particular project has that very specific focus on the telecommunications and that interoperability sort of focus, as opposed to that wider one-stop shop for all kinds of welfare support and information advice, guidance, signposting. But in time, I do envision that they will all come under the same roof at some point. So that's it from me. Happy to take any questions. We can take them after if that's what's preferred in today's, but thank you very much for your time.
Oh, that's fantastic, Hannah. Thank you very much again, and for also your tremendous illustrations on the slide that are able to bring the subject matter alive. And again, we are receiving questions into the Q&A. So just to remind everyone that and those who may have joined us late, we will have a Q&A session at the end for hopefully about 20-25 minutes. So you will be able to raise your hand and ask questions then. In the interim, of course, feel free to add your questions or comments to the chat function. And I see that Chris has obviously been responding to a number, and Hannah, if you prefer to respond via the Q&A chat function, you can do that now. Yeah, that would be great. But it's obviously eliciting a lot of interest, which is fantastic. So this brings us then to our third and final kind of presenters. Alessandro, if you're able to share slides. Is Katherine also? Oh yes, I see Katherine. Yeah, and both from the British Red Cross and we'll obviously do a joint presentation, but in relation to a wider project with other partners. So if you're able to share your slides, then the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Hannah and Chris, for some really interesting presentation that I think that this opportunity really can open up conversation around community hubs. And hopefully, Katherine, can you share? Okay, should be able to see the screen in 1 second. I'll introduce myself. I'm Alessandro Froldi. I am a British Red Cross Community Resilience Project Manager. I've been leading on pilots for developing and testing community resilience approaches with the Red Cross. And today we'll be happy to speak about our partnership with Groundwork and Aviva UK, with whom we've initiated a piece of work.
Katherine, I thought I'd just raise, you're currently showing presenter view
I
rather
don't
than
know.
presentation.
Sorry, how do I change that?
Okay.
I think
Apologies.
it probably should. It's all right. I think it's probably come up as two separate tabs potentially. I'm not sure if hosts may be able to better help.
I'm not sure.
I think
That seems that works now. Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on. Sorry.
That's
Let me just try a different way. Apologies. Thought I had it figured out.
It was the final what you had just before clicking out was fine. Yeah.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Can everyone see the slides?
Works.
Okay.
So yeah, I was just introducing the partnership between British Red Cross and Groundwork as an opportunity to really work together as part of an exploration of how do we ensure communities are better prepared for and have better protection against emergencies, including the impact of climate change and severe weather events, and what role do we have as an organization in supporting communities in this task? And we've highlighted as part of this partnership a number of barriers that we as an organization, with our previous experience in the field of community resilience, highlighted as some barriers for community to be more resilient. And we've seen them as initiating with climate change and the impact that has on communities, and going down to kind of more like at the regional, the national level. We can see that there is potentially like a gap between leadership and coordination, and sometimes that results in the lack of clarity. And ultimately, at the more local level, what we've seen is that often there's lack of investment in the infrastructure, lack of capacity in those communities, and all of this for community really means that they are often unprepared. They're often not very involved into the emergency planning structures. And they don't have a clear understanding of what's going on and what are the plans, what are the procedures, and that kind of makes it difficult for them to jump on board when an emergency happens, and it makes it harder to connect and coordinate. And ultimately, all of this results in the fact the community don't know really. Not all community know what to do, and when that's the case, that create a bigger impact for the crisis that we're all facing. So based on this, we started kind of building a vision that also included the community hubs, but really kind of in the sense of hubs that can enable community to be better prepared on one side, and obviously against the crisis and the different impact of climate change, but also better connect to the local response, because those two areas have been identified as areas where our organization could support and are already supporting in some way, but be a really good opportunity to work with local partner and explore how we can do this better, and how Community Hub can function as part of this system. So here is an opportunity to kind of explore a little bit what do we mean by Community Hub, and at least how did we start to use Community Hub and kind of concept, and how did we design the concept of Community Hub that we've discussed and explore with our partners at the local level. And for us, hubs were really, as Chris and Hannah mentioned, space that could be physical or could be virtual, that could utilize local assets and resources. And the second function there was that of bringing people together and kind of as an opportunity to really have volunteer existing groups or more informal groups, as well as potentially businesses and resilience professionals. So that's really, that element of connection was something that we thought was really important for hubs in the way that we've intended them. And having hubs also, we've learned in the discussion and in capturing the learning with our partner that there are some additional features that would make hub better workable and more functional for the needs of the local community, as well as the resilience partner with whom we've been working. And those kind of features are the fact that hubs are linked to the resilience infrastructure. That's kind of an important element, and something that we know that is key for the success of hubs, that they are not operating under the radar. And at the same time, a second element that we've highlighted is the need for there be a mix of training, capability, and needs assessment as well, so that it's a bit of a two-way system, so that the training is not just simply delivered, but there is also like an interactive way, so that there is option for understanding what is needed and what is already there, what is the existing capacity. So that's a continuous flow of dialogue there that is delivered and offered regularly to communities and to the hubs. And the hubs can be a system so that this infrastructure is better coordinated, and that kind of coordination element need to be also outside of the hubs with the community, so that those hubs are not isolated from their community, but they are always potentially open and have an interaction and an involvement with the community that is coordinated and is not fully spontaneous. And finally, the fact that this support is recognized, so that really the availability of the hubs, their capabilities and their need is something that is recognized, and is something that is taken into account by the resilience infrastructure. So that's something that can be used during an emergency, after an emergency, and is linked up with what's already there. So those are some of the areas that we've engaged in our work so far. We're currently toward the end of the second year, and it's been important to work with those partners. It provides a mix of urban and rural communities, communities that are all affected by multiple climate-related emergencies, but at the same time that have been able to share with us their learning and practical knowledge that they've developed in the ER around engaging with communities, building relationship, building trust, and building structure that worked for them in establishing better involvement and coordination with community assets and resources. So that's something that has been really important, and we've used those partners as critical friends sometimes, and sometimes advocate and champion for our work on the ground. And we've also used them to define 5 different resilience approaches that we want to test as part of our work, and we'll show some example later of how we've done that. So those 5 resilience approaches are touching on asset mapping and identifying assets at the community level. This is an important element for the system of community hub that emerged from our vision. At the same time, as mentioned earlier, it is important to understand what's already there and promote that. So those kind of making people aware of existing network is an important element. Building partnerships, making sure that the work is established, and once pilot is done, there's sustainability and legacy, and ultimately providing training was something that was identified as useful, important, and desirable for upskilling people, so that hubs are ultimately brought up where the need is within that community. And finally, sharing and celebrating the best practices. Obviously, this is something that is important, that community are central to that, and they're kind of recognized in doing that, so that that results ultimately in what we see as community hub resilience system. And all those different approaches can bring element of this outcome, and they're doing so obviously bringing together people and places. And as I said, we'll be showing, and Katherine should be able to kind of take over from me and show some example of some of the work that we've done so far.
Thank you, Alessandro. Sorry, can everyone hear me okay? Just making sure. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so just looking at approach 1, so identifying and establishing community asset. So we use tailored workshops that are intended for emergency planning teams, but also representatives from the community sector, so that we can empower them to identify and establish these local assets for better and effective emergency response. So far, the feedback has been really positive. So 85% of participants said they agreed or strongly agreed that the training equipped them with the practical skills and information for analyzing community resilience and conducting asset mapping, and 100% said that they have a better understanding of community resilience overall. Our next example is the resilience training. So our training approach is tailored to upskill individuals based on individual needs, as Alessandro mentioned before. They're carefully designed modules that build upon each other, so they could be kind of co-produced and emphasize key themes in emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. But from the community's perspective. The modules cover specialized topics such as community resilience assessments, developing community emergency plans, which underscores the importance of well-structured plans and is intended for those leading the creation or updating these plans in their community. Some additional modules address volunteer management, flood response, first aid, the basics of climate change and weather emergencies. There are many modules available that cover a range of risks and weather-related risks. But in all, the sessions serve as a crucial platform for partners to share their concerns, best practices, and experiences from recent challenges. And the response from these has been really positive, with 86% of participants expressing a greater likelihood of offering support due to our training. So this is from the community side. And the last example is our approach 3. So that's partnership building. So we actively support local resilience partners by establishing governance structures and delivery groups. So starting nationally, we have our steering group, which we use to kind of facilitate knowledge exchange and collaborate problem solving for our project. And then locally, we have something called delivery support groups. They are currently being established in the different areas to advance the project. So the example here is the Norfolk Steering Group, which is a new group. It's consisting of stakeholders like the voluntary representatives, Cat 1 responders, library operation leads, district emergency planners, and the list goes on. And to date, our program has engaged about 173 participants across all the areas. So this isn't just Norfolk, you know, and they include everyone from local authority professionals to volunteers, the volunteer sector, and then kind of bringing it back to kind of our hub system, or our model here is looking at what aids the development of a community hub system. So there's kind of 3 learnings here. The first one is having a product approach. So an example is in London, we collaboratively developed a new type of community resilience and weather emergency workshop with partners so that they could deliver in instances when our team wasn't present. We have are in the process of, in different areas, pushing for and developing influential champions. So these are kind of community leaders and advocates. So examples in Havering and Greater Manchester, we're currently identifying and enhancing the skills of a select group of volunteers to serve as community leaders and aiming to empower them to deepen our impact and outreach. And third is the expression of interest. So we've developed this because we needed it to kind of, it helped us with fostering more effective partnership building, you know, by employing the expression of interest. So for an example is in London with the GLA Community Resilience Fund work, we identified the London Borough of Havering as a new partner, and we used our expression of interest for this. So this is how we're planning to involve future partners. So we are looking for possibly 1 or 2 more areas to do our approach in and test our model. So of course, if anyone is interested in partnering with us, definitely let us know. So next is what doesn't help from our learning. So a lack of resource and infrastructure. So those limited resources include struggles with funding and staffing, kind of coupled with the absence of established community networks and this is kind of hindering some of the progress in some areas. Lack of motivation, so community engagement can be hindered by just a limited interest in preparedness, response, and recovery. So, for example, in one of the areas we're working, we've learned that the community is mainly interested in response efforts. So they have hardly any interest in the kind of preparedness and recovery efforts, but they do respond really, really well. So we've really had to kind of be flexible with our approach and our model in all the areas that we work, and kind of, build our learning from there. I'll put this in the chat, but if you want to find out more information, this is our website. We're still working on it. It's not complete yet, but yeah, we'll share our email addresses and this link later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much.